Okay, I think we're good now. Welcome everyone to Ethereum Guild number 4 of this year. Today we're going to be talking with Toni from the Ethereum Foundation. Yeah, welcome Toni. Thanks for spending some time with us here today to enlighten us on some perspectives that we have and looking for opinions on. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So like to basically get started, I mean, like the whole purpose of this discussion is really to sort of understand as part of like your research and stuff, if what we're doing right now with ChainSafe's Lido contribution is really something that is helping or harming the network. And then we also have, we want to get your perspective on what you think about local block building, builder blocks, and understanding a little bit about the future and perhaps what you sort of see happening there when it comes to the block production pipeline. So why don't we start with like local block building and builder blocks? Like a lot of us here at Lodestar have definitely have a lot of perspectives on wanting to, ensure that like we maintain the ethos of Ethereum. And one of them, is going to be, being able to propose your own blocks locally as just somebody who's not sophisticated, just some, a lonely actor like us, not like some big corporation or anything like this. Do you have any sort of like, I guess, opinions on maybe what you think future of block production holds for us?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think this is currently one of the topics that is very much in movement. Let's put it that way, because local block building, just focusing on the values, right, is of course the best you can do, because if you don't censor manually, if you don't modify your client, you will not be censoring anything. You're also not kind of a risk of centralization, because it's only you and your validators. So it's not like people would send order flow directly to you. But of course, you're already missing out like most of the EL rewards, right? And this is still very negligible, I would say, because most of the rewards are actually coming from the CL side and not from the EL. It's just, I think, 2.6 times a year or something, where you propose a block and then you get the EL rewards. But apart from that, you don't miss out that much. When it comes to where local block building is moving, right, this is a more difficult question, because right now I would say it's slowly fading away a little bit, right? It kind of, especially with PeerDAS, we might need local block builders to also become more sophisticated in order to continue local block building, just because otherwise they might not be able to push the blobs out fast enough. And then with other proposals like inclusion lists, what else? Of course, scaling the gas limit, all of those proposals just make local block building a little bit more difficult, I would say, in the future.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's currently impossible or anything, right? There are people that are building blocks locally, but what we definitely see is higher reorg rates for locally built blocks, more missed head votes. So your blocks are in general kind of less stable.
And it's already pretty bad, like you only get maybe a couple blocks a year, if even, right? So these local block builders are already at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the number of blocks is the same for everyone, right? No matter if you use MEV-Boost or local block building, but yeah, you only have like 2 to 3 blocks per year, and you might definitely not want that block to have any risk of being reorged out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And would you check on the reorg stuff? Did you check if people ran MEV-Boost? So did they wait 1 second for the header timeout, basically? So basically because they had no min-bit configured? Because that was one thing I think that artificially like bumps up the reorg rate, because they publish 1 second later than when they could publish if they just had local blocks enabled. So
yeah, I think that's one of the most unfortunate things, that this interaction between relays playing timing games and validators using the min-bit flag turned out to be problematic, because you as the validator, you request a header, the relay plays timing games and delays the response. Then after like 1.5 seconds or even 2 seconds, the relay responds with a value that is below your min bit setting. And at this point, you lost 2 seconds. So you're already 2 seconds into the block where you suddenly realize, damn, I now have to quickly start building a block and get it out.
Oh, but it should be 1 second, right? Or close to 1 second.
It depends how much the relays play timing games. I think they played around with that a little bit. It was 1 second, and for sometimes it was 2 seconds.
Okay, but then
1.5.
you need to modify the client, right? Because, for example, on the spec itself, there's a 1 second timeout. So,
right, sure.
I guess, yeah, I don't think any CL has the option to set a flag where you can bump the timeout. But on all the sidecar software like MEV-Boost, Commit-Boost, you can configure this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So it might have been exactly 1 second forever, just because, except you make some private deals with them as a validator, then maybe they opt in and allow you to submit even later or accept bits even later. But yeah, in this case, the default might be 1 second. Then let's say you request and you get like in second one of the slot, you get the response, and then you lost like 1 second.
You know, from a technical perspective, all this stuff makes sense, but I'd like to, if we can, I want to step back and talk about some of this ethos that Phil mentioned. And this is the part that I think is, at least from my perspective, is most, I think, important. So I'd like to ask you, what happens, you know, from because it feels like research is kind of resigned to builders are inevitable. We're gonna keep them around. We want them, you know what I mean? And that to me feels antithetical. And you know, what are the risks to doing away with local building? And just talk about some of that feeling stuff and some of the ethos stuff, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the two biggest points would be censorship resistance and liveness.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be the two issues we would definitely face kind of if we completely abandon local block building, or we could face, because if MEV-Boost has a bug and we kind of don't accept it as a core protocol bug because it's not core protocol, right? Then we just lose liveness, right? Because today, if Ethereum breaks because the majority of client has a bug, then we are just fine with it. It's a core protocol bug that destroys not only the chain, but in this case, liveness. But for MEV-Boost, it's different because it's not part of the protocol, but has still such a huge impact on liveness.
Like neither are the builders. And if I remember correctly, a couple months ago, there's one of the builders was giving bad headers back or bad blocks, you know, for a day or so.
Yeah.
Like,
and then they have those circuit breakers that then have again a bug, right? We had that situation too, where Blocksort Relay was giving bad headers, and then their circuit breaker had a bug, so they didn't stop to do so. So they just stopped by some manual intervention. And this is, of course, a big problem for liveness in general, right? Because if MEV-Boost has a bug, then no small builder can step up and say, let me rescue the chain from this liveness failure. It's just not possible if there is no way to build blocks locally. Yeah, I think this can be solved by enshrining MEV-Boost. Of course, that's one of the things on the roadmap with EPBS.
This is the thing, though. This is like that feels like the answer that everybody is going towards. This enshrining builders.
I don't think it solves anything, right? You would still need this circuit break in the CL client. I mean, the builders can still miss their blocks, produce invalid blocks. But the only change with EPBS is that you can punish them by slashing or reducing their staked ETH. Right? You have on-chain punishment, but right now it's also like they are punished with their reputation, whatever. I mean, there's no incentive to do this for them. It's like a bug, right? Like you said, like usually.
And the amount of money that they make is millions of dollars a day when you start looking at some of the metrics. And like, so how much do you have to slash them in order to make it like an actual financial penalty to keep them honest? Like,
I think the problem is really just we have to. I mean, why I say enshrining it? It's like imagine we have a problem with general purpose execution layer requests, right? Suddenly, no client can process them. The chain would hold, but we would not call it. It would be a lifeless failure, but different than a lifeless failure from MEV-Boost, right? Because here, core software that we tested, that we put on devnets, has a bug, and it's now fair to assume core software has never a bug. Of course, this is like romanticizing the whole thing, but I think we should assume
but it should be.
our core clients. Yeah, hopefully.
Like, that's
But
why
I
we
guess
do our
every line of
DevNet.
code
That's
comes
why we
with a
do-
number of bugs too.
Yeah, but like that's why we do DevNets. That's why we do scaled rollouts, and like we do that. But there is no like the builders aren't on the test nets and the DevNets, like, and they're not at least in a way that like they don't feel coordinated. They're like a black box that does whatever they want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the builder is not the problem here. It's the relay, right? Because the builder can submit bad blocks. The relay should.
They're also not on the DevNets though. In the DevNet rollouts, like the relays.
Right. And that's
I mean,
where
the software
enshrining helps.
but not the live relay, I guess. Yeah.
Correct.
And that's where enshrining would help, right? Because if it's enshrined, there is no way to not push it on a DevNet with the latest client releases. It would just be treated as core of the protocol. It would be like the deposit contract or something, right? It's not like
No, but the builders would still be external, right? Like,
right.
I don't get
can
the
make
point
mistakes.
what we gain from enshrining there, because
Enshrining
the builders
relays,
would still be, yeah, but they would still be closed software, right? Like the state builder would probably be the current relays anyways, and then they would like from it. I don't get how this changes liveness assumptions, really.
Doesn't.
So as soon as a builder has a bug, or let's say all the builders have a bug, but the relay is still fine, then you as a local builder, you could just step up and say, okay, I submit a block to myself. Right.
But
So
that's
this
what's
is kind of the
happening
promise
already, right? Like we have the
Correct.
circuit breaker in the client, which says like we have this amount, so it's different than every client. But when you have amount of missed slots, then it falls back to local building only until you restore liveness. But it's kind of the same, right? Or
So Faith has a hand up. I just didn't want.
Yeah, I have, I think, a question. Yeah, and for context, I'm speaking from an operator's perspective. Yeah, I think we might need to step back and understand why, like you said, I don't know if that that metric is correct, but like about 90% of the blocks produced are external blocks. Yeah, are not produced by the engineer. I think it's because maybe a lot of people are going for the maximum rewards on the EL. Yeah, a lot of people are trying to make the most APRs. Yeah, should discussion then shift to how can the engine blocks be more competitive? Yeah, I understand like competing with builders and Flash and what's it called and relayers, different companies. Yeah, like they have the dev hours of. Competing with the dev hours of a whole company is probably very difficult, but should there be an EIP or something that actually talks to making locally produced blocks more competitive as opposed to trying to punish? I think, of course, simultaneously, it makes sense to maybe punish bad behaviors on external produced blocks. But I think the one of the biggest things that can be productive or that can probably increase the number of locally blocks being produced is actually trying to play the same game, maybe not the same game, maybe a form of the same game, and making locally produced blocks even more profitable, in my opinion.
So this is one of the things I was going to bring up next, and it's because of the dark pools. Like people are submitting transactions directly to the builders, and a lot of the transactions that the builders are basically using and sequencing are not in the public mempool. So local block building will never be able to see most of the order flow. And like this to me is also one of these like terrible externalities that, you know, like as we talk about all of this, like enshrining builders and making sure they're there and using it for the private, you know,
not builders, but relays, right? This is important.
Okay, so explain that to me, because that my understanding is that people are sending, like MetaMask and all of them send their transactions to the co-located builders that basically are doing the searching and ordering, not relays. The builders do that.
Right, right. So why I'm saying relay is because the builders can do what they want. So builders today are not forced by anyone to build valid blocks. And every validation that happens is happening at the relay. Of course, builders might validate their blocks in order to make sure their block is accepted, but in general, it's happening at the relay. So if the relay makes some mistake and it passes on some invalid block, then it's the relay's fault. It's not the builder's fault, because it was the relay's responsibility to make sure that this works. And the validator is never trusting the builder. It's only trusting the relay. So if we now enshrine a relay, let's say we enshrine all of the relays that we have today, then even if all the builders have bugs and we can assume the relay doesn't have a bug, then you should be able, as an honest local block builder, to submit your block to the relay, and the relay would forward it.
But to speak to what Faith was talking about, is that block would never be as profitable as the one who has all the transactions.
Yeah, and I think that's a lost fight already. So we will never be able, that's an impossibility, we will never be able to make build blocks locally as profitable as the builders, just because the most money what builders makes comes from arbitrage, and you need kind of two-digit $1 million on multiple big exchanges to only compete in that game. So a local builder is never able to compete for arbitrage on Binance, on Kraken, and so on. So most of the money that they actually get from the builder is basically just builders competing with each other for arbitrage transactions on centralized exchanges. It's not even a DEX trade, right? It's just they do a lot of CEX trades, and then they want the DEX trade to reflect that or something, or place their DEX trade into the block. But most of the money is actually from private order flow. And another point is, you know,
and this to me though,
MEV flows. Sorry,
go ahead. I apologize.
Currently, MEV flows to the validator, right? Which is also better than builders keeping it. But to be honest, it's also kind of, not ideal, right? I read, for example, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I read this post by the European Central Bank, and they were describing it as Ethereum has those entities, relays, builders, and validators, and they are basically rugging users. And
they're not
overall,
wrong.
It's not wrong, right? Because what the goal should be is the goal should at some point go back to the user, right? This is kind of what BuilderNet tries to achieve and everything. Yes. But with this, if we don't allow the builder to maximize that value, kind of by, I don't know what we could do on that front, but if we kind of don't allow that, then the builder might also not accumulate the money to pay back to the user. So I'm always thinking of this pipeline like the builder paying for order flow and then being able to bribe the validator to take its block so that the builder gets its arbitrage on chain while users get their transactions on chain with getting some kind of kickback for their transactions. I'm not saying that this is kind of the ideal solution. I would love if we can solve MEV differently, but it feels like this pipeline of someone selling order flow, which is basically just information. So someone selling information, someone paying for that information, and then the same between validators and builders, and then kind of creating those markets. It's probably the best we can do.
Like, this is where, like, I take exception, because you say it's inevitable, and the only way that this could ever be solved is to create another overly complicated widget that moves money from here to there, and you accept the MEV here, and you move it around, and you rebate. You know what I mean? It's like, why not put the effort into private, or like making the private order flow on chain, or making the transaction pool encrypted? Like, we're spending an awful lot of research and development time doing post-quantum encryption. We're spending a lot of development time and money to do 3-slot finality. We're spending a lot of, you know what I mean? Like, but it's just a matter of priorities. If MEV is the thing that is the most, like literally one of the biggest issues and risks to Ethereum, because the central banks are starting to sniff out ways in order to literally like regulate this stuff, like why not accept it as inevitable and figure out a way to get rid of the builders?
I think, I mean, for example, encrypted mempools, even with encrypted mempools, you would still have MEV, right? So other chains that have encrypted mempools still, because builders would just spam. So they would just spam and hope that one of their transactions lands before you and the other one would land after you.
Yeah, it's basically a probabilistic MEV game. I think it's would be really bad, yeah. I think that's why last time in the MEV call we discussed we need like a programmable encrypted mempool, which has like algorithm that guarantees ordering, right? And this is kind of how BuilderNet works, right? Like,
right.
You have some
so why not push for that? Like, do you know what I mean?
BuilderNet is interesting. It's just one producer of that chip, and I wouldn't trust it right now. Maybe I will in a few years. I think many have the same opinion that it's a nice technology, but it also breaks every few years. So it might not be ready yet. But in general, that's exactly how it should go.
So if we replace the hardware component that ensures that this whole thing works with like homomorphic encryption and only software-based approach, which of course is not there yet, right? I think there was like this presentation about a game or something that was like extremely slow at DEF CON. But in theory, then you could enshrine this, right? This concept of BuilderNet just in the protocol, where like as a user, you know how your transaction is executed, and the proposer attests to that by or you can confirm what code they run. I mean, that's how BuilderNet roughly works, right?
I think there's still this critique that I often hear. I can't go deep on that, but I heard that there is some censoring attacks on this TEs where basically someone still decides what goes in the TE. And this is then the person that can do some harm here. So even though kind of in the TE, what happens is deterministic and no one can affect it, but the person kind of that decides what goes in still has some power by figuring out, if I put A, B in there, but I leave C out, then suddenly the block is nicer than if I put everything in there. Stuff like that. I can't go deep on that. I just heard that and I'm just repeating it, but
like this is where like one of the things that we have been talking about is like if you make inclusion lists inclusive, meaning like all of the transactions that are going into the next block are in the inclusion list the slot before. You know, essentially you're putting the mempool, like you're putting the mempool for the next slot on chain. And that way you are forcing what transactions with a non-censorable and enforceable through rewards and penalties way of ensuring what transactions make it. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
wouldn't you just kind of move MEV one slot ahead by just making the IL then the actual place where you play for MEV?
I mean, yes, but there would be a yes, but like there are ways in order to randomize some of the stuff there as well. Like you could possibly create some kind of seed that changes the order for the ones that are included, or create some kind of randomization factor so that it's much more difficult. Like you would have a lot of spamming.
This is already difficult because it always those MEV mitigations that used randomness, they all failed because of spamming, because builders could just spam as many transactions as they want, and one of them might slip through and get on chain. So even if you have, let's say you have an inclusion list of 300 transactions and you can put that all into the block, so we ignore the block size and everything here, even then, if this randomness only determines the order, right, then you would already know, okay, I see the randomness, I see the order, and what could I do to kind of change the order now? And then it becomes this, okay, I add another transaction, or there's a little different. I add another transaction, or there's again a little different. It's the same with the current inclusion list proposal, right? With Fossil.
Yep.
Fossil has this, right? And for Fossil, it's also like you get inclusion lists, which you must include in the next block, but you are free to order them as you want. So why does it not make sense for a builder to get on the inclusion list? Simply because the next builder could be a completely different builder, and they could rug you terribly, right? If I put my sandwich onto an inclusion list, but suddenly, so my front run and my back run, but suddenly I'm not the builder who builds the block, so I'm not the one who orders the transaction, then the next builder could completely rug you. So for builders, there's not that much incentive with the current Fossil design to get spots on the inclusion list. It would just mean they would have to publish their blocks too early. For example, for arbitrage, you wouldn't want to do that. It would make sense for NFT drops or ICOs or something, because there you know, okay, at this exact block, there will be an MEV. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. But this was also a big discussion in the Fossil design, kind of, do we want to make inclusion lists conditional or unconditional? Which means conditional, the builder doesn't have to include all those transactions if he's able to fill the block up with other transactions. And conditional would be like the inclusion list becomes part of the next block, no matter if we say at the top of the block, at the bottom of the block, in the middle, or the builder is allowed to reorder. But yeah, all those MEV concerns were basically then the trigger to move to conditional.
So, and I feel like I'd give everybody else a chance to talk before I ask more questions, because I've got another tangent.
I think you're in the clear.
So if we are on this L2 scaling roadmap, and it feels like it's the right answer, like I know there's a lot of discussion about how to properly create incentivization back to the validator set to create the root of trust and to keep validating it, and you know, how to have that value flow back, because we move the transaction flow, like the real transaction flow, like this off of L1. Like, why not figure out or research the idea of like what Unichain is doing, where you move the MEV to an application layer, because they're doing the sequencing. They have ways in order to do a lot of this order flow. Obviously, in base rollups, it becomes a little more difficult, but like, or ENS figured it out 10 years ago, how to make sure that someone isn't stealing your domain name. Like, why not go all in and focus on what L1 does, is the plumbing and creating the security and creating the root of trust that everything else rolls back to, and just saying it's up to the application builder. Like, you know, because like if you think of the traditional financial system today, we have that layered settlement approach. Like your shares at your brokerage don't actually sit at your brokerage, or at least in America, they sit at DTCC, like with your name on it and Schwab's name on it, and probably some other intermediary's name on it. And when you do a trade, like Schwab will settle between me and whoever has a sell or a buy, you know, the commensurate trade. But if they don't have in their order flow a way in order to do that, they will basically credit me, and then they will go off to the market to the next layer off, until ultimately at some time delay, just like we have a 12-second time delay, and then the next guy's got a 1-second time delay, and the L2 has or L3 has a 0.1 second time, you know what I mean? Like, and just commit to that layered settlement approach that the traditional financial system uses today.
Yeah, I mean, CalSwap is one example, right, that tries to do that, to solve MEV on the app layer. I think it's just not as effective as we might want it to be. Maybe the UX is also not as good as it could be. I don't know, right? All those app layer MEV mitigations, they kind of died out a little bit. I'm not sure
CalSwap,
if we
I use
should
it
have
all the
invested.
time.
Yeah, me too. I like it a lot, and it's great. But of course, it uses this.
Working.
Yeah, but of course, it's not as efficient, probably, just because it relies on this off-chain infrastructure that does order matching. I don't know. I don't
And
think
I think MEV
MEV can.
went down, right, on mainnet or in general. Like the MEV blocks on average are much lower than like a year ago. So
Yeah, but this
they're
could have
leaking
different
less
reasons too.
MEV, I guess.
Because you just talking about the payments to the validators here. Because
Yeah.
one thing that Relay started doing is they call it bid adjustment, which is, let's say you are a relay that is super fast, right? You know, I'm always faster than all the other relays. Then what you could offer to the builder is, because builders tend to overpay, right? For example, they have an arbitrage opportunity that is worth 100 ETH. Then they tend to pay 99 ETH for that arbitrage opportunity. So 99 ETH goes to the validator and 1 ETH stays with the builder. And if more builders compete for the same, basically nothing, usually nothing should stay at the builder and all should be moved to the validator. The problem is some relays get the bids earlier than others because they are faster, they are better collocated. And then what relays can do is they look at the highest bid they got and they look at the second highest bid they got, right? And then they take the delta. For example, the highest bid is 100 ETH. The second highest bid is 1 ETH, right? What the relay then does is it takes the delta, 99 ETH. It has the builder's key. It can sign the bid, the changed bid. So the relay is allowed to modify the bid for the builder to put the 99 ETH down to 1.1 ETH, so that you just have enough to win the auction, but you don't overpay. And the delta is then split between the relay and the builder. This is already happening today. And this might be a reason why validators are now getting less. Maybe just MEV just went down too, because we don't have any hype right now, right? I would even say that might be the main reason, but this bid adjustment strategy that relays came up with to make their operations more sustainable, this is definitely one of the reasons why validators are getting less.
I mean,
So
what
that would
about
be solved if we have better relay diversity, right? In theory, or
Yeah,
better competition, because then you can't do that because there might be another relay that outbids you, and then you lose
right.
the.
And it's a super risky thing. Yeah, you're right. Because if there are many relays that are all as fast as the other, then it's just a risky thing to take a builder's bid, set it down, because maybe that builder will lose just because of your correction.
I mean, there's another thing that is not spoken, is that there is no guarantee that the two big builders are not one builder. Like, there is no guarantee that the top 5 builders are not one builder, because we know nothing about who they actually are. Do you know what I mean?
I know a lot
no.
about them.
But like,
So,
do you know that they're not colluding in order to make the
I
bid?
think so. So for Titan and Beaver, it's very clear, right? So they are both kind of VC-backed companies, and Titan is even very public with who they are. Beaver a little less. And then our Sync Builder is also a completely different entity. So I'm not afraid that those are the same entities, especially during the OPEC sanctions. We saw that, right? That Beaver build sanctioned, Titan didn't. So I'm very confident that those are different entities. But
They might be different. But
I know what
colluding.
you're going. Yeah, I agree.
You know what I mean? They could have an
Because
API
one of the
that basically they're sending what their bid is to each other before you actually send the bid.
And also relays have so-called fast lanes, right? So if you start building today and you submit your block in the last milliseconds, where it's in general the best opportunity because the MEV is the highest, then you're not simulated in the so-called fast lane. So the relay would just simulate from known builders the blocks. And if it turns out that the validator requested the block before your small builder block could have been simulated, then the relay would just not forward it. So this is already another kind of centralization vector in the pipeline that you as a small builder, you cannot. At the beginning, this was nice because when we did the merge, there were some attack vectors against Ethereum's liveness through MEV-Boost. And there were papers published. I remember 2 papers. One of them said that they found an attack vector on Ethereum and it's DOS and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, it didn't work out because of the relays kind of fast lane code that kind of halts all the other builders, anonymous builders, and postpones their validation. So this was not
Mhm.
possible. And I know what you're up to here. So this is definitely true that builders are anonymous. We cannot really tell who they are.
I don't
for
trust
whom they work.
anything PE. I don't trust anything PE. Like,
Yeah.
you can't. It's too much money to be made and too many greedy people in the world. And
Right.
like, I
But
like,
I would even
believe.
say it's the same with TEs, right? Would you trust the TE?
Yeah, but
I
with the TEs,
wouldn't trust Intel. Someone has the key. Someone at Intel has the key, and they could go out. Of course, it might be 100 different people. I don't know how it works, but someone has the key who he
I
could
thought
attack
my
the TE.
I guess that's a good point. I was going to say, I thought it's the owner has the key, but you're right. Someone has to put that key in there. So like, there is someone at the manufacturer that has that key.
Right.
And you would detect that, right? If there's like the blocks are not built as per the source code, which is open source, and then like the only thing is it's temporarily compromised, right? Like one block, maybe 2 blocks, and then you would see this. I guess this is the argument for using TEs there, because you don't have like long-lived secrets in there. It's just like the transactions that are valuable for this block are in there, and if it's compromised, you compromise this, but not like long-term secrets, right? So
That's a good point. Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
Like, with the TEs also have like an SD card to load the keys. Like, I think they like one of those micro SDs. Like, I know that we had that on we were doing NFC, and we had a hardware security module, and like we could basically load the keys with an external. So like the owner of the device is the only one with the key.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really not sure about TEs. TEs especially. So I just know that I wouldn't trust them that much yet. I think that it's great technology, but maybe not yet there. And if we see 10 years without it breaking, I would say, okay, let's try it. But I think it's not even 10 years ago that the last TE was kind of, or it was not a TE, it was, what was it? I don't remember. But definitely some secure enclave stuff.
like
Yeah,
the
I think it's
side-channel attacks, you mean?
maybe that was the thing. I don't
Where
remember.
you could like extract data from the TE.
Yeah, attacks like that. So I think it's a nice solution, but it's not there yet. Same as encrypted mempools. Adds a lot of latency and stuff. And so it seems like builders are, or having this MEV-Boost pipeline seems like at present the only really good trade-off here. And also,
I feel like it contradicts also with the roadmap, right? We want to scale L1, but this is kind of the opposite direction. Like,
right.
so.
I just wanted to say that exactly what you say. So we need builders for blob propagation. We need builders to act as super nodes. We need builders to, in the future, build the block level access lists. So it's kind of nice to have some party that we don't rely on for liveness and for censorship resistance, that kind of takes on the dirty work that validators don't want to do, like building a block or like figuring out what the best block level access list for that block is, and then move the critical things to the validator, like a testing, super critical. Yeah, I think that's basic. And determining fork choice, right? Fork choice is still something that is done by validators, and they communicate what their fork choice outcome is to the builder. So the builder cannot overrule them by saying, yeah, the validator just said he wants to reorg, but I won't because it's my block, right? This is something that is not possible today. So the relay must enforce that.
I want to bring the conversation back to a little bit of diversity, because I think at least with stuff like diversity, we can at least alleviate, I guess, some of the problems. For us, like, the market has generally changed quite a bit in the last couple of years even. And part of the reason why, at least at ChainSafe, we had opted in only to utilizing non-censoring relays. I'm wondering this is still, if it's still effective in any way, because it seems like builders will send transactions to pretty much everyone. And now that the US government is also very friendly and probably not censoring Tornado Cash anymore, is there any reason why an entity would, specifically select maybe 1 or 2 relays of like, I guess the 5 or 6 out there, like for censorship resistance, as an example? Is there any benefit to just using non-censorship relays anymore?
I don't think so. Of course, this always depends on your definition of censorship, right? Because if you say the OFAC list was not only Tornado Cash, right? There were also those Chinese heroin dealers and Russian warlords and Philippine human traffickers and everything. So there's every sort of crime is on there, basically, every hardcore crime. And I guess all of the builders are still censoring those. But I have no clue. I could look into that. I saw the Ronin hackers, right? DPRK is still moving funds around, but most of the addresses that are on that list are basically dead and dead for years. So no one is using them or interacting with them. And Tornado Cash was a great example because it was just used on a daily basis multiple times. So by now, I don't think any relay is censoring Tornado Cash transactions. I could look that up, but I know it from Ultrasound, who was never censoring. Bloxroute stopped censoring. Block Native turned down their relay. Aestos is not censoring. Gnosis is not censoring. So most of them are not censoring, and those that were censoring, like Bloxroute, they have stopped it. I've checked with them at some point. And right now, I wouldn't see any benefit of using non-censoring relays because basically all of them are non-censoring. But it makes sense to kind of limit the choice of relays just because to reduce latency. Because of course, if you have 10 relays, then you need 10 get header requests and you maybe wait for 10 timeouts to happen. So instead, if you just have 2 or 3 relays, it's, I would say, just from a latency standpoint, a little better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess like depending on, like the performance, each one probably depending on your location and also like their performance and stuff will make a big difference. Just select like, the top 3 or 4 relays, and that would give you the best bet to get the best blocks, I guess. So that.
I mean, I guess
Right.
if you have Ultrasound and Bloxroute, you're basically done in reality. But I guess the other ones would be liveness fallbacks, because I at least know that Flashbots relay, they send headers earlier as well. But I checked the header responses on our Lido nodes, and we basically get all the headers at like the last milliseconds of the timeout. Because Ultrasound and Bloxroute, they delay until they can, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a little bit unfortunate, I think, especially for people that cared a lot about censorship resistance, right? Those were told like, hey guys, please use the min bit flag to uphold censorship resistance. And then after a year after Relay started playing timing games, it was almost like, okay, there was a significant impact of the min bit flag on the reorg probability. So it was not only a significant result for local building, but especially significant for those using min bit.
Yeah, so speaking of min bid, there's probably like, it's pretty obvious, I guess, through like Raiden Network, who has their min bid set pretty high, especially even for like today, including us at ShaneSafe. So I think some of the top performers, like I guess Attestant, ourselves, and Sigma Prime, we do produce like greater than 50% local blocks because of the setting.
I think it's 90% now.
Is it 90% now?
That's why I think we should reconsider the min bid we set, because because the value got down, right, of the bits. So we never hit the 0.007 threshold.
Yeah, and then
but what is the rationale to still use it? Because I mean, if I had to if I had to find a case why min bid is bad, then or local building, I would say that every local builder kind of throttles throughput a little bit because they don't have access to private order flow. The average gas used in a locally built block is somewhere around 5 to 10 million, right? While the average MEV-Boost block uses like 15 to 16 million, right at the target. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm curious. So for me personally, it was always censorship. That was the main reason to use MEV-Boost. Is there another reason?
Not at the time when we set the min bid flag, it was mostly for the censorship resistant aspect of it. Now that the market especially has changed, there's like nothing in the mempool anymore either, the public mempool. It's just been left like that pretty much since then, without any sort of update based on the changing conditions of the market. And I think like with entities like us, Sigma Prime, and Attestant, we probably just haven't revisited that. And I guess what I'm hearing from you as well is that min bid in general is probably pretty useless, even at a low.
I mean, it depends, right?
Yeah.
I heard from local builders that they like that, you know, this is almost like an idealistic thing that their block was produced in their house and is now appended to this billion-dollar protocol. Right, so local builders really being like, hey, this is now my time to contribute some data to this thing, what we call a blockchain. So it's almost like a vibe thing, but just looking at it, so more for solo stakers than for institutions. But apart from that, I don't really see why min-bid would still be better, assuming there is no censorship going on.
Right. And for us, like, I guess the highest priority for us is making sure that we're not hindering the network in any way. Like, we were always very cognizant about our contributions to the health of the network. And we thought at the time that censorship resistance was, you know, something we were willing to pay the price for, so that we can continue to keep Ethereum censorship resistance. Now that we potentially have future routes to mitigate censorship resistance, it might be more worth it to perhaps not decrease the throughput of Ethereum anymore by producing like 90% local blocks, it seems like.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing, Toni, you didn't mention was, I don't think there's good data on this, but it also increases the overall MEV extraction, because a local block doesn't do any arbitrage and nothing. And then basically the next builder gets like 24 seconds to do arbitrage, and it increases like makes it even worse for liquidity providers and stuff like that. So, but yeah, the other arguments you mentioned was also what I told Phil, or because basically I also decided for my own setup to completely get rid of min-bid, just use local building as like this censorship fallback, which I'm not even sure this works in reality, but there's this should override builder. I never seen it in action, but in theory, my Nethermind instance has it enabled. So I never saw the heuristic work, but yeah, guess we need some censorship. But and yeah, it's a liveness fallback, I guess. I don't see any reason why you could do local blocks. It's too bad right now, I think.
And even talking about censorship resistance, I was once looking into the numbers, and during the OFAC sanctions, right, MEV-Boost builders included on average more Tornado Cash transactions than local builders. So it was actually the MEV-Boost, so per block, right? This is relative. And this is just because there were some builders that couldn't compete with BeaverBuild, because BeaverBuild just had more money on the exchanges, better algorithms, and so on. But what this builder had was access to transactions that BeaverBuild had no access to, and this was Tornado Cash. So this builder had some ARB in the pipeline, but now he needed, let's say, $100 to overbid BeaverBuild. And they could do so by including 100 Tornado Cash transactions. So what you saw is almost like Tornado Cash transactions stacking up, and at some point their priority fees help some censoring builder to win the auction. And there were builders. Let me post it into the chat.
But did they stack up because there was no local block in the meantime? Because the local block would have included them as well, right?
Maybe they used the local blocks in the meantime and bid for it, but they only won when they had this edge from censored transactions. I posted this website. I took it down at some point. This was basically my website where I that I used to kind of observe the whole situation. And I then took it down and hit it into this strange URL because builders were pressured to censor. So they were telling me that this is kind of bad for them because they feel pressured to censor because of my website. But what you can see here, if you go on builders, and then you sort by, in the table, by total percentage, by the second last column, there is manifold, right? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Manifold. 32% of all their blocks contain Tornado Cash transactions. So every third block of manifold comes with a Tornado Cash transactions. And for this second builder, it's free real estate. For this builder, it's 17%. And it's basically builders that were just waiting until enough Tornado Cash transactions accumulated. And then it was like, okay, that's my turn now. I will cash in the prior fees of those and make sure they get included. And overall, this led to a situation where more MEV-Boost builders were including Tornado Cash transactions than local builders, although this is counterintuitive because local builders are not looking at the transactions, they're just including them. So
that was just because we had so little local blocks, right? If we had more local blocks, that would look different.
No, but this is relative. Based on, I calculated.
But I don't get why would a local block not include the Tornado Cash? Like because it had low priority fee, or what is the reason?
Maybe that, or I thought about that too because this is weird. So my only explanation would be that one of those builders is maybe also offering a privacy service, or they are using it for themselves, so that they are themselves mixing a lot, and that's why they have access to so many Tornado Cash transactions. Because usually it would make no sense as a Tornado Cash use to submit it as a private order flow.
Yeah, I guess if you withdraw, you need this relay service anyway. Maybe that's why.
Right. That's true. Yeah, for the withdrawal it wouldn't matter. But
yeah,
still,
that was also my theory. Like the Tornado Cash, if we had more censorship, that would have been good actually to reduce censorship.
Yeah, I think so.
Then these builders that include everything, they will be able to outbid more frequently. And it's actually good for builder diversity in that case.
Yeah. If Uniswap would be censored today, then we would have zero censorship by tomorrow because all the censoring builders would just have to stop their operation. They could not compete with the non-censoring builders. And those builders that escape this legislation the fastest, they would just make a lot of money. So yeah, it was kind of an unfortunate case that it was just this small privacy app that was sanctioned. But I've been using it over and over again, and I never felt a big UX problem or anything. Nor with Tornado Cash, no. Even nowadays I use Raygun mostly, and even there, it kind of the UX. You don't really feel it, right? Because you're not dependent on quick inclusion or anything. You sometimes press the button and shut down your computer because you know, yeah, it will eventually go in. So even from that perspective, from the censorship perspective, because we now talked about liveness and censorship resistance. And I think the censorship resistance property was never that bad, although 90% of all blocks were produced by censoring entities. So it was never that bad because everyone who wanted to use those sanctioned entities could still do so. And for liveness, difficult question, because I'm not a fan of enshrining relays. I think many people are not fan of that, but until we enshrine them and make them part of the core protocol and have core devs coding that stuff, until then, we have to live with bugs that can cost us liveness if the circuit breaker don't work. And local building, if we have inclusion lists and the inclusion list forces you to build a block with 15 million gas or something, and you're a builder that is usually relying on MEV-Boost, and suddenly you have to build the block yourself, you might not even be able to do so. At some point, the inclusion list might be larger than what you can realistically include yourself and propagate.
But for enshrining relays, you're not talking about EPBS. Something different.
No, not really. Yeah, I'm really not a fan of EPBS because of the fork choice complexity. I think it's It's in my opinion, it's just way too complex. It's this trick that I mentioned at the beginning of the call, where you just say, yeah, let's take some external input and put that into the fork choice function. The external input here would be the output from the payload timeliness committee. So I'm not a big fan of it just because of that reason. But from the advantages it gives you, it's amazing, right? It gives you better propagation, better pipelining. It enshrines the relays. It makes sure that we have this fallback. Yeah, difficult. Maybe it's worth the complexity, right? I don't want to shit on EPBS or anything. Maybe it's worth the complexity, or maybe it's worth touching fork choice. This could very likely be the case. But yeah, I hope we can discuss that in Berlin.
Yeah, we need POTUS for this. So
POTUS is coming.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
For sure. I mean, yeah, this will be some interesting conversation. I guess we'll have in about a week's time. But I know we're at time now, and I'm not sure. Everybody's probably got something they got to go to. So I just want to thank you, Toni, for sharing your wisdom with us, and yeah, looking forward to hopefully finding solutions to some of these complex problems in the near future with you.
Yeah, sure, and yeah. Happy to talk with you guys. So if you have any questions, just reach out. Always happy to talk to every one of you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming, Toni. Really appreciate it, and thanks everyone else for joining. And yeah, have a good day, and we'll see each other soon.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Have a good day, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.